Hello again. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to each and every one of you, wherever you may be, at whatever time that you're watching the stream. It is good to be here with you. And I want to dig in. I want to dig into this sermon because I have some powerful things to share with you that are transformative and good and wonderful and beneficial. But first, let us begin, as we always do, with a centering prayer. And so I invite you to repeat these words after me. I welcome the Spirit of truth into my mind. And let it grow in my heart. Thank you, God, in, through, and as me. Amen, Ashe, and so it is. And so it is. Yes, yes. Well, again, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are beginning a new sermon series. This is a 12-week sermon series, Miracle Minded, the 12 Conditions of a Miracle. And this sermon series is inspired by the book titled The 12 Conditions of a Miracle, The Miracle Worker's Handbook by Todd Michael. Now, I know we're always giving you books, we're giving you book titles, and we tend to use a lot of sermons we teach from the book or it's inspired by a book. Don't run out and go get this book. You don't need to do that. We've spent an entire summer reading. It's been an entire summer immersed in a book. Of course, it'll be wonderful to have this book in your library, and I recommend that you have it in your library. But in this sermon series, I'm going to teach you the 12 conditions so that you don't have to read the book. I'm going to teach you the 12 conditions and give you practical steps to make them a way of life. So this book, The 12 Conditions of a Miracle, is based on what Todd Michael calls the Alpha Passage. And the Alpha Passage is the story of the loaves and fishes as told by the writer of the Gospel according to Matthew in chapter 14, verses 13 through 23. Now, I said to you all last month, this is also kind of be a Reimagine the Bible series. So you might have heard me say something that may be unfamiliar to you. I said, as told by the writer of the Gospel according to Matthew. Matthew didn't write that Gospel. Mark didn't write that Gospel. Luke didn't write that Gospel. John didn't write that Gospel, right? But it was written in their name. Right. So as told by this writer, the writer of the Gospel according to Matthew in chapter 14, verses 13 through 23. And what Todd Michael writes about, he says that this Alpha passage teaches us something about how to be miracle workers in our lives, that he believes and teaches that this story is like a code. Once you have the key to unlock it, he writes, the technique of miracles is laid out in 12 steps, 12 conditions. When these 12 conditions are activated, they act as a kind of combination lock, opening a gate leading to the dimension of the miraculous. So you may be asking, you may be thinking, well, what are these 12 conditions? Because clearly I need to know them. The 12 conditions are as follows. Condition 1, emptiness. Condition 2, alignment. Condition 3, asking. Condition 4, maximizing. Condition 5, giving. Condition 6, grounding. Condition 7, visualizing. Condition 8, gratitude. Condition 9, acting as if. Condition 10, engaging the cycle. Condition 11, receiving. And condition 12, recycling. Now, if you're writing those down, you can come back and rewind the video to get all of those, but you'll hear them again over the next 12 weeks. I actually won't read this list out each and every week, but I think hearing this list should spark your curiosity, especially if you know the account of the loaves and fishes, because what does maximizing and grounding have to do with the miracle of loaves and fishes? What do any of these words have to do with that miracle? Well, let's put our focus on the first condition. Emptiness. One of the things I hope you notice is the alignment with where we began when we started the summer masterclass of Open Your Mind to Prosperity. Catherine Ponder starts off by teaching us that cleansing, purification, and release is the starting point of prosperity. The first condition of the 12 conditions of a miracle is similar, but far more profound. And the first condition, emptiness, is based on a single verse. That first verse, Matthew 14:23. And I'm reading here from the New Revised Standard Version. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. Very simple statement. It just sounds like a part of a narrative that's taking us from one point of the story to the next point of the story. Jesus hears some information. He then goes and gets on a boat to a deserted place by himself. The crowds hear it and they follow him on foot from the towns. We can read this account as a story. We can read this account of the loaves and fishes as a narrative, or we can read it as Todd Michael encourages us to, as I read earlier, a technique, 12 steps, 12 conditions, a code that unlocks miracles. And so I want to insert a theological term here because this is very important, right? There's a theological term that we use called hermeneutic. And what a hermeneutic is, it's like a lens. It's a way of seeing. So imagine if I took off these glasses and put on another pair of glasses that were red in tint, then everything that I see would have that red tint and that red hue. And if I picked up something that was blue, it wouldn't look blue because we know that red and blue makes purple, right? And so that blue item would now look purple because of the lens that I have on it. And that could be cool, but it would also be false, right? Because I would be declaring that it's purple. It's purple, it's purple. What y'all talking about? That thing ain't blue. God said it's purple, right? But what I have on a lens that's red, that's making it that color. And so it's important to understand that when we're reading the Bible, what we're always using is a hermeneutic. When someone says the Bible says, what they're really saying is this interpretation says, this way of seeing it says. And it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a wrong interpretation, but it's important that we understand that it is simply an interpretation. It's a hermeneutic. And so what we're doing for these 12 weeks, we're putting on a very specific lens that Todd Michael has invoked that I think is beautiful and powerful and empowering and constructive and beneficial and miraculous. And so it helps us to see something that is could be just a mundane story or a nice story. Some people put on a heroic savior lens when they read this. Oh, look, Jesus, he's so amazing. He just fed all the people. Oh, wow, Jesus is so powerful. This is why we must worship Jesus, because look at what he can do. That's a lens. But this lens that Todd Michael is inviting us to put on is a lens that says that what we are reading is a technique that you can practice. What you are reading is a set of steps that you can practice and embody and then experience miracles in your own life. And that's supported by one of the realities of what Jesus is quoted as saying, that greater things than these will you do also. So it's clear that Jesus was always teaching the disciples how to be, how to live, how to express, how to practice, not to worship him. Similarly, we look at the Lord's Prayer. The disciples asked Jesus how to pray, teach us to pray. And he said, pray like this, not pray these words. And what we know is actually a very easy study to find this out. But the prayer that he used, most of that Lord's Prayer wasn't even brand new. It's part of a well-known Jewish prayer that already existed, that they already knew. So he wasn't saying, pray these words, pray something that you already know. He was giving a formula for prayer. So this lens that Todd Michael, this hermeneutic that he's inviting us to put on, is not far-fetched by any means, because we recognize that actually much of what Jesus taught was a code, was a way of being, was the words, again, he used, a technique, a combination lock, steps that we can then embody and practice. So using this hermeneutic, what is the symbolic meaning here? Jesus withdrew to a deserted place, emptiness. Now, there's a spiritual principle that we all know and heard, and you've heard PY and myself say this and quote this thousands and thousands of times. Nature abhors a vacuum. And in the text, Todd Michael writes this. He says, and what is nature? There should be no confusion on this point. Nature is spirit, or at least a very large part of spirit. Therefore, another way of stating this law is that spirit abhors a vacuum. If you're taking notes, I invite you to write that big and bold, highlight it, circle it, underline it, whatever you need to do. Spirit abhors a vacuum. And let's sit with that for a second. Now, I must admit, in some ways, by stating that, we are anthropomorphizing God. We are making God human, as though God has likes and dislikes, in order for us to understand the nature of the divine and the nature of source, because that's what we have to do as human beings, right? We're using something that we already understand to then expand our minds even a little bit to understand the truth on the divine level. Spirit, God, source, the all in all, abhors a vacuum. Now, this does not mean that it hates or even dislikes empty space. It means that it cannot allow empty space. Lord, that feels so good to me. Put that down in your notes. Spirit cannot allow empty space. This is why we practice the condition of emptiness, because emptiness requires God's source nature to fill it. Somebody could just go home right now. That was exactly what you needed to hear. The reason that we practice and create emptiness, that spirit abhors a vacuum, because it is its nature to fill it. It cannot allow empty space. And so as a miracle worker, when we practice this first condition, emptiness, in a sense, it's almost like we're forcing God's hand. Y'all want to make God show up. You want God to show up in your life. And so you praise and you holler and you shout and you sing and you dance. But all you got to do is get empty. Because it is the nature of the divine. It is the nature of God itself to fill. It knows nothing but to fill. It can't allow emptiness. We see this depicted over and over and over again in the creation stories across all traditions around the world. There's this idea that there was nothing and source had to fill it, because there can never be nothing. And so in some stories, it wanted to know itself. Out of the oneness, it wanted to experience itself. And so it split itself off. We recognize it in science. We have and understand the Big Bang, that there was nothing and then there was an explosion, that then life is experiencing and expressing itself even now. It's continuing to grow. It's continuing to expand. New galaxies, new stars, new planets, new moons are being created and co-created. It is nature's nature to fill. Spirit abhors a vacuum. It cannot allow emptiness. And so the moment that we create an empty space, source, by law, by nature, by its very nature, will fill it. You all may remember Ernest Holmes in The Science of Mind. In the introduction of The Science of Mind, he gives us one of the beautiful metaphors and analogies that I love, of understanding that thought creates a mold in the subjective or the subconscious mind. And so we talk often, and I teach often, this idea that whatever thought we hold in our mind, it's like we're creating a mold, right? We're creating, Halloween is coming up next month. So you could have a cake mold that's a jack-o'-lantern, right? And so the batter, you put that batter in that cake mold, it's going to be a Halloween pumpkin. It's not going to be a Christmas wreath. It can't be a Christmas wreath, because that's not the mold that you provided. But we also recognize that it's the nature of the batter to become whatever the mold is. Yes. And so this is why we teach create molds. You're creating a mold in your mind. You're creating a mold through your thoughts and through the pattern of your thoughts, because it is source's nature to fill it. You don't even have to worry about that. That's not your job. And it's beautiful to understand that this is how it works. This is how it operates. When you understand how it operates, then you work with it. You work with the way that source works. This is the very nature of God. Now, how do we apply this first condition? How do we apply this first condition in our lives as we face our own challenges? Well, first, I want to take you to Todd Michael takes that first verse that I read earlier, and he reinterprets it with this lens, this hermeneutic that he's given us, so that we can hear it anew. We can hear it fresh. We can see it from another angle. And he writes, Jesus went away into the desert alone. There he withdrew his self or ego by going down into a state of emptiness and inner stillness, a place or condition of potential. Now, I love that place or condition of potential, because what did I just talk about when I talked about the mold, right? That empty mold for Halloween is potentially going to be a Halloween cake. That empty mold of a Christmas wreath is potentially going to be a Christmas wreath. But of course, you would have to have the mold, you would have to have the cake batter in order for that thing to become. And so metaphysically, this is what we're doing. Now, I know as some of you hear what I just read, you may be thinking, here we go again. PG's going to tell us to meditate. Lord, they always telling us to meditate. We just meditated earlier. I don't really like meditation. Do I have to meditate? And I bet you PG is going to talk about transcendental meditation. Guess what? You're right. I'm going to talk about all those things today. I'm going to tell you about meditation. But there's so much more to this first condition. See, the first condition of emptiness must be practiced on both the inner, spiritual, mental, non-physical level, and it must also be practiced on the outer, external, physical level. And I'm going to share something with you a little later about the spiritual practice of fasting that I have never said or shared before. But before we get into the inner and outer practice of the first condition, there's something else important that must be noted about this Alpha passage, the story of the loaves and the fishes. Because when we're reading any text, it's important to get the whole context. It's important to look at what happened before this miracle and what happened after this miracle. Now, as we move forward through these 12 conditions, we'll talk about what happened after. But today, it's important for us to look at what happened before this miracle. Just before this miracle, and if you heard it, when I read the original text, it says, and when Jesus heard this, he withdrew. What he heard, he learned of the tragic and brutal death of his cousin, John the Baptist, who was beheaded by King Herod. According to the text, Jesus' disciples claimed and buried the body. So he wasn't aware of the death. He wasn't at the funeral. Lord, he didn't get to attend the funeral. He wasn't aware to even attend the funeral. And it says, according to the text, and after doing so, they went and told Jesus. This is a powerful setup. Like, imagine, we all have that favorite cousin, right? Our cousins are a lot of times like siblings. Imagine your cousin was murdered tragically for no reason by an evil king. The family had the funeral and everything. They're buried, and now you're getting the information. Imagine how you would feel, right? This is just can get us in the place of understanding where Jesus is. And the text says in verse 13, now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew to a deserted place by himself. Now, the writer doesn't give us any information about Jesus' emotional state, but we know that Jesus and John the Baptist were family and very close. And again, that setup that I just gave you, just think about it. He didn't even get to pay his last respects. He didn't get to have words or eulogize his dear cousin and also brother, right? And spiritual brother, right? They were so much alike, right? And so his response to an unthinkable tragedy was emptiness. I want you to hear Todd Michael, that translation again. Jesus went away into the desert alone. There he withdrew his self or ego by going down into a state of emptiness and inner stillness, a place or condition of potential. Why is this a place or condition of potential? Because spirit abhors a vacuum. Whatever your challenge, whatever your situation, whatever your need may be, whatever your desire is, whatever miracle you're looking for, create a vacuum and spirit will fill it. Wherever you're feeling grief, create a vacuum and spirit will fill it. Wherever you're feeling down, create a vacuum and spirit will fill it. Wherever you're feeling unworthy, create a vacuum and spirit will fill it. Wherever you are in doubt, create a vacuum and spirit will fill it. So how do we create a vacuum? How do we practice the first condition? Now, remember I said this must be practiced on an inner and an outer level. It must be practiced in the non-physical, and it must be practiced in the physical. And so the first condition, practicing it on the inner level, yes, meditation. Y'all know that meditation is important. Y'all know that we practice meditation here at CSC. That's why we have meditation as a part of our services, right? That's why we talk about spiritual practice not being a daily spiritual practice not being an option. And 5 minutes of that practice every day should be meditation. Now, I'm going to give y'all Todd Michael, I'm going to give y'all his words, right? Because y'all heard me talk about meditation enough. When you have attained this state of inner stillness, even partially, you can immediately begin tapping the fountainhead of intelligence and draw on its indescribable power. The ability to access this meditative state is vital to the success of your dream or your miracle. Whether it is knowledge, it is knowledge, and knowledge is power. And it is power, the right kind of spiritual power that will allow you to change things. I want to say that again. And it is power, the right kind of spiritual power that will allow you to change things. Spiritual power allows you to change things. This knowledge, this power will come in large part in the form of information. This is then where the inner conversation happens. You can't even really call them downloads because it's not coming from up there or out there. It's coming from within. Meditation takes you out of the land of confusion. Meditation connects you to the source of all power. Meditation connects you to the source of all knowledge. Meditation connects you to the source of all wisdom. And yes, in the book, Todd Michael recommends transcendental meditation. Todd Michael also recommends Zen meditation and yoga, right? These are wonderful things that you can practice. I also want to note that the first time I read this book was in 2009. And at that time, transcendental meditation was on my bucket list. I was aware of it. I didn't learn TM until 7 years later in 2016. Right. So what's beautiful is sometimes you need to hear these things and hear it again. You need to read it and read it again. And you come to a fullness. And that's really the place that I was at when I decided to learn transcendental meditation. I was in this place of fullness where I had to do something. I was seeking relief, and transcendental meditation became that relief. So I'm not saying, and this does not mean that if you do not practice that specific meditation technique, that you will not be able to access power and information, that you won't be able to practice the first condition. You can start with a breathing meditation, which is one of the powerful meditations to me because it's analog. You don't need an app. You don't need your phone. You don't need me. You don't need PY. You don't need to get on YouTube, right? None of that. And so start with box breathing or square breathing, right? And what is that? That's breathing in through your nose at a count of 4, and then holding for 4 counts, right? Then exhaling from your mouth for 4 counts, and then holding for 4 counts. And then starting again, breathing in for 4 counts. And set a timer, right? Start with 2 minutes, particularly if this is brand new to you, 2 to 5 minutes max to start with, right? And that's all you're doing, right? And in doing that, you're starting to reset your nervous system, right? In doing that, you're starting to create a stronger connection between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. In doing that, you're starting to minimize that fight, flight, or freeze state and start to access the realm where you can see things more clearly. Start to access the space where you can begin to question your thoughts and question your beliefs and decide if you want to continue to make those things your reality. And as you start with 2 to 5 minutes, then start to build up, right? Build up slowly but surely to about 20 minutes with a breathing meditation. I also recommend the Silva mind control method, which is powerful. And that's something that you can learn on your own. If you go to Audible, there's an audio series on Audible where you can learn the technique. There's several different ones. Also, there's the Silva Mind Control app. And mind control, this is not about controlling minds and manipulating people. It's only about controlling your own mind, recognizing that when you tap into this meditative state, right, then you have this profound awareness and you have a profound ability to now make choices and start to attract and call in things. And so the Silva Mind method is wonderful. Also, Deepak Chopra's primordial sound meditation, which is akin to transcendental meditation. That's another technique that you can use, right? You would have to reach out and learn that. I was also reminded, for those of you that have the book Lessons in Truth by Emily Cady, the 10th lesson in chapter 10, the title of that chapter is Finding the Secret Place. What is that all about? Emptiness. She actually quotes the famous quote, "Nature abhors a vacuum," in that chapter. And what she's teaching, it's another way of saying the same thing. If meditation, for whatever reason, you have a feeling about that, or maybe you just feel like, oh, I can't practice meditation, and so you're kind of in your head about it, sitting in the silence. Sitting in the silence. That's all you're doing, right? And so she talks about the need to sit in the silence, how to sit in the silence, why we sit in the silence, etc. And so that's another resource that you can tap into. That's another thing that you can use. But that's about the inner, right? And it's very important that you have the inner practice going. That's part of emptiness in this first condition. But there's also the outer. What is the outer about? Well, this echoes another thing that we learned in Open Your Mind to Prosperity this summer in our masterclass. We know that giving creates a vacuum. It is a universal law that you must give to get. And so practicing the first condition, we must give of our finances as a spiritual practice regularly, frequently, and systematically, right? And this is not just me saying this because I'm a pastor. It is not me just saying this because this is a spiritual community or a church. Here at Todd Michael, this is his words, and he's a doctor, a medical doctor. Look carefully at your own situation. If you are not experiencing complete abundance in every area of your life, you must be blocking your flow of incoming energy and resources in some way. The antidote is to release your death grip on your stagnating supply of energy. The temporary loss that is created as you begin to give creates a vacuum, which in turn starts to break up the dam. New flow will be stimulated. You don't have to give a large amount. What is important that you are willing to release something and that you practice this releasing regularly and consistently. Y'all know I say this all the time during giving. Right? Not giving is the equivalent of holding your breath. This is the death grip that he's talking about. And so emptiness, literally, when I exhale, I'm emptying out my lungs, which then prepares me by law, naturally, to be able to breathe in, to receive. This is the first condition. Spirit abhors a vacuum. Life abhors a vacuum. It is a natural state of being. And so we understand this instinctively. I breathe out. I must breathe in. And there's air available for me to breathe in, right? Billions of people on this planet, and there's enough oxygen for all of us. And so in closing, I want to talk about another way that we create an outer vacuum, and that's through the spiritual practice of fasting. I was reminded that last year in the Affirmative Prayer Mastermind, someone asked me about fasting. And one of the questions, because of course, if many of you, if you were raised like I was in the Pentecostal church, we practice prayer and fasting, and they kind of go together, right? I've been there with the best of them. Daniel fast, the whole thing. I've done it all, right? And so this was something that we learned in practice that we were supposed to do. Now, we do not teach or encourage fasting at CSC, primarily because of the way that fasting is practiced, and it is antithetical to universal spiritual law. What do I mean? Well, fasting as a sign of devotion to God is absolutely not necessary. Fasting as a sign of one's spiritual mastery is absolutely not necessary. Fasting as a sacrifice to get God's attention or to get God's blessing is not necessary at all. Absolutely unnecessary. That was something I did. Like, oh, if I knew I was really trying to bring something into my life, then this is what I would do. I would fast, because then God would know I was serious. Fasting as a symbol of suffering, because Jesus also suffered and everyone must bear their cross, is absolutely not necessary. Fasting to prove that you are in the world, but not of it. Oh, I don't need all this food. I got God. Is absolutely not necessary. With that said, there is a way to use the spiritual practice of fasting with the understanding of what we've been talking about today, that you're practicing the first condition. And so, as I said, this is something that I've never said before, I've never shared before, but in this context, it's powerful to consider as we recognize that we're doing this on an inner level, and we're also doing this on an outer level. So we're giving of our finances, but just as giving of our finances creates a space within us that will be filled, we can use fasting in this manner. You can intentionally and deliberately practice a fast in order to create that thing that we talked about, a place or condition of potential, because I know, just as I know that when I exhale, there will always be the inhale. So I know that if I turn my plate over, I'm creating this condition of emptiness, knowing that it will be filled. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to convince God to do something. It's God's nature to fill. I'm not doing this to try to prove that I'm spiritual. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm not doing this to sacrifice, because sacrifice is unnecessary. I'm not doing this to express that I'm truly in the world but not of the world, because the true reality of who and what you are both human and spiritual. And so you must acknowledge your human nature. You got to eat. But as you create this place or condition of potential within yourself, not to get God's attention, not to prove how deep or spiritual you are, not as a sacrifice to a deity, not to prove that you love God, but to create a space that God will fill, God will fill it. Why? Because spirit abhors a vacuum. For this truth, I am so very grateful. I am so very thankful. And for this truth, I say amen, ashe, and so it is.